Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I am your host, Chris Duffy, and this is Wrong Answers Only. This show is produced by LabX, a public engagement program at the National Academy of Sciences. And for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, the National Academy of Sciences is a private, nonprofit institution that gives the government objective, evidence-based advice. And LabX is the team at the NAS that takes that fancy science and makes it fun. They create video games, shows, board games, and video series to make it digestible. And on today's show, you and our panel of comedians are going to be learning all about fire. We will also find out what our guest scientist is like when she's not doing her research. And I want to point out to everyone that tonight is an interactive show. So the beauty of doing this online is that we can get you all involved. We want to hear your jokes. We want to hear your questions. We want you to play these games right along with us. So if you look on your browser below where you're watching, you should have the ability to type comments and questions. So that should be right below. And if you can't see that, maybe try exiting full screen. Sometimes if you get out of full screen, you can see it there. And you should also see polls next to the chat box. And after tonight's show, you're going to get a post-show email with links to go deeper into our scientist's work, to find out more about her research, to read her papers, to get access to her books, and videos and jokes and all sorts of other great stuff from all of our comedians. So you're going to have a lot more to look at if you're interested. Okay, that's enough about the setting the table. Let's get into tonight's show. Today, we've got an incredible panel of comedians who are going to be playing. We've got Naomi Ekperigin, Joe Firestone, and Josh Sharp. Hello, hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Woo!
Hello. Josh and Joe, you seem to have merged into one, you know.
Yeah.
I can get all that. We're going to get that.
Wait,
sorted out.
can you hear me talking? Joe,
Absolutely,
move your mouth
yes,
while I talk. It's me, Josh Sharp, speaking through Joe Firestone.
You know, that's beautiful. And we're going to figure that out. But first, let's meet tonight's scientist. I could tell you all about her, but rather than having me explain who she is, let's hear about her from herself. Here is a video. This is tonight's expert.
It's almost too simple of a way to think about fire, but it really helps for explaining it to people. You know, the fires that we see on the news that are like burning down people's homes and causing evacuations and destroying habitat, like those are the bad fires. Like we don't want to see those. What we want to see on the landscape is the good fires. So basically fire that you put in conditions where it's so low risk that you're basically, can walk beside the fire. Like the fire just creeps slowly and moves along. And some people even call it slow burning. For Indigenous people, like it's not just about fire, it's about like their community and sustaining their culture and getting out on their land and teaching their children and learning from elders, like mental health, physical health. So I'm Amy Cardinal Christianson. I'm Métis from Treaty 8 territory, which is otherwise known as Northern Alberta. I'm from the Cardinal and Laboucane families, and I'm also an Indigenous fire specialist with Parks Canada. And I currently live in Rocky Mountain House, or Treaty 6 territory. I'm also a co-host of the Good Fire podcast.
Amy, thank you so much for being here today with us. We're so glad to be talking to you about your work.
I should have combed my hair in that intro video.
Oh, don't worry. You look great. Don't worry. You're a fire expert.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I
The
hate
beauty
that
standards
term
for fire experts are crazy in this culture.
It's true. We expect you to know everything about the flames and be perfectly groomed at all times. Come on. Can't
No way.
Well, panelists, you're going to have a chance to talk so much to Amy over the course of this show, but this is your first chance to ask a fire expert about her work. We call this You Do What? So panelists, what is the first thing that you want to know from Amy, from our fire expert? Naomi, what's the first question that you have that you're dying to ask?
How are you working with fire and not getting burned?
Great question. We all need to know.
Yeah, good question. So the fires that we put on the ground, you know, it's people, we're learning from people who have years and years and decades of expertise of putting fire on the landscape. So it's really putting it in the right places at the right times. So yeah, I guess that's how. And there's also like personal protective equipment that many people wear, but basically the goal of fire is not to have anyone in unsafe conditions at any time where they could get burned. But fire is dangerous, and unfortunately it does happen.
Okay, Joe, your turn. What do you want to ask? What's your first question for Amy?
My first question is I want you to rank the following: fire, water, and air.
Okay, I'd say water is number one. And for Indigenous communities, we say water is life. So without that, yeah. And then I would say air too, because we need to breathe. I know I'd put fire third, which I know
mean,
people might be surprised.
It's a shocking upset. It really is. I'm stunned.
Okay.
Great. Well, we're
Yeah,
gonna get deep,
love fire, but we need the other things to be able to have fire, right? So if we don't have air, like air is part of the fire triangle, which you need for fire. And then we need water to put it out, right? Rain or stuff. So yeah, nice to have those two in place before we light a fire.
Okay, now I was trying to hold off on follow-up questions so that we could get to Josh's first question. And Josh, I hope that you will not be too offended.
Apology accepted, Chris.
Thank you so much. We have to know, what is the fire triangle? You said you need that for the fire triangle. What's that?
Yeah, so the fire triangle, oh my goodness, and I'm probably going to get it wrong because I'm not prepared. So it's oxygen, fuel, and people can maybe type in the chat the third that I'm totally drawing a blank on.
Hope.
Oxygen, fuel, and hope. When they combine, the fire triangle. Okay. Josh, what's your first question for Amy?
Well,
and we're gonna hear from the chat too on what they think the hope. Whether it's hope or something else.
I want to know, were you drawn to fire as a child? Because this is just, you study one of the things we're really told to stay away from all growing up. The only thing wilder than this would be if you were like a scientist who studied strangers with candy in cars. You know what I mean? So I really want to know how you got there.
Yeah, so quick, I did remember the third thing, so it's heat.
Oh,
they were gonna take back my PhD if I didn't remember.
We had someone else throwing heat and ignition in there. Someone else said ignition, but I think heat.
Okay. Yeah, but no, that makes sense too. You need the spark, right, to make it go. So yeah, so I grew up in northern Canada, Josh, and there fire is kind of a normal part of life. Like there's like the boreal forest where I'm from, it needs fire to be able to regenerate. And so I just grew up around fire. Lots of my extended family were firefighters. My husband's a wildland firefighter. So for me, it was more when I moved south that it became weird that people weren't like just surrounded by fire and firefighters and like the fire world all the time.
Well, we're having some first questions from the audience as well, so I want to get some of these in. Also, I want to add that even after you gave the third piece of the fire triangle, someone also wants to suggest that they also believe that the third piece is passion, which, that could be hope, passion, ignition.
We're getting like a fire septagon at this point. I've heard a lot of valid answers.
It's many sides to the fire shape. Someone is asking, Amy, I hear that the latest is that prescribed burns are not a good not a good technique for forest management. Is this valid? This feels like it might be a trap question, so be careful what you say. This might be one of your colleagues trying to get you.
No, I don't agree. I think that we need fire on the landscape, and the beauty about prescribed fire and controlled fire is putting fire on the landscape when we want it in the right ways. And so many of my colleagues at Parks Canada are prescribed fire experts, and they have a lot of knowledge about putting fire on the ground to achieve certain ecological conditions, so like the landscapes that we want for different animals and vegetation.
We also, you talked in the intro video about the difference between a good fire and a bad fire, and it does seem like these days we hear a lot about bad fires. Especially, I live in Los Angeles, that's where Naomi is too. We hear a lot about bad, scary, big fires. So can you just give us like another really quick, super simple explanation of what's the line between a good fire and a bad fire in your mind?
Sure. So bad fire is the wrong fire in the wrong place at the wrong time. So basically close to communities or in areas where there shouldn't be fire, where, people's lives and safety are at risk, and also like the mental health of and safety of first responders, right? Like it's very challenging to always be having to go and respond to wildfire events. And so those are the bad fires, that threaten people in our way of lives. And so good fire, on the other hand, is when we put the right fire in the right place at the right time. And so for my nation, that's usually the early spring or late fall, when we put fire on the ground when it's at low risk. So we get beautiful fire that you can walk beside on the landscape, which I think I talked about in the video as well. Yeah, so that's the main difference. And good fire is also a really important part of Indigenous culture for many nations worldwide, not only in Canada and the US, but internationally too.
So in the event of a bad fire, one of the most important things I think we all know is that you need to get out safely. And Amy, you literally wrote the book on fire evacuations, specifically a book called First Nations Wildlife Evacuations, a guide for communities and external agencies. So Panos, in this next segment, we have our fire evacuation expert. We are going to make sure that you three are ready to go. This is always be prepared. So here is how this is going to work. She wrote that book. She is an expert in fire. In this game, I am going to put 30 seconds on a timer. I have a timer with 30 seconds ready to go. And I am going to ask each of you panelists to run around your house or wherever you currently are, and you're going to grab whatever you would take with you if you had to evacuate right now. And then after those 30 seconds are up, you have to bring back whatever you could assemble, and you're going to show it to us on camera. And if you couldn't get it in that time, too bad. That is the time you have. Are any questions?
I've been training for this. This is something I think about a lot.
Wait,
Naomi at Trader Joe's.
Exactly.
Joe, what did you say?
We have to survive.
Well, you have to show us what you would bring if you were going to evacuate right now and try and survive.
Well, that's a big assumption that I want to evacuate, Chris. Maybe.
These are some assumptions. All right, I'm
Just
going to give you a
really
countdown.
hard. Okay.
And it could be, you can also, you can bring pets, you can bring loved ones, you can bring whatever you want. Okay. All right. 3.
Wait, but what if we don't bring the pets and the loved ones? That's kind of messed up.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, that's the rules of this game.
Like a-holes.
3, 2, 1, go. Your 30 seconds are on the clock. Go for it. Okay. So, Amy, while they're running and assembling their stuff, I assume normally in an evacuation, you'd have slightly more time than 30 seconds, right? What do you say is like a typical time you have in an evacuation?
It depends. Sometimes people have days to evacuate when they know there's a fire coming, and sometimes evacuations aren't even because of the fire front, it's because of smoke. Oh, a puppy.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Time is up. Time is up. Time is up. And Joe it seems like Joe may have evacuated. She's not coming back. Joe is actually fully gone. I would not be surprised if we did not see Joe again. Amy, while we wait for Joe to return, you said sometimes you have days. What is like, in a bad type of situation, you might have a shorter time though, right?
Yeah, sometimes you have no time. I've worked with communities where literally people just pounded on their doors and told them get out. So it really ranges on the timing there. And two, I just want to quickly, Chris, shout out my co-author on that one, Dr. Tara McGee, and then the First Nation Wildfire Evacuation Partnership. Yeah, so not only me.
You are one of the people who co-wrote the book.
Yes,
that's important.
I would like a signed copy, please. Thank you.
Okay, Naomi, what did you have you had 30 seconds to assemble. You said you've been training for your whole life. What did you bring?
Well, I got my daughter Maybelline, all right? Right here, little touch of tongue out. She said, what are you doing? What are we doing? Then I got my little tote of personal papers, okay? We're talking birth certificate, immunization record, passport, checkbook, honey. You think I'm going to be out in these streets broke? I have to rebuild. I'm going to need my cash.
Wow. That is extremely impressive. You have a loved one and almost all of the supplies you need to rebuild your life. I'm impressed. Amy, what do you think? What would you say on a scale of, on an A, B, C, what grade would you give her?
Like A being the best, and that portfolio is impressive.
He's leaving behind her husband.
He can work it out. His legs work.
There you go. All right, Joe, what did you assemble in your 30 seconds?
I got the dog here, and then I also got a knife.
All right. So, in some ways, Naomi, you're bringing your own money. Joe is bringing a way to get other people's money.
Absolutely.
That's right. Amy, what would you say? A, B, C, D, F? Where would you put it?
Maybe a little lower. You might need a wallet, and if you have any medication, you might want to grab that too. That's usually what people really struggle with, is trying to get their meds once they're out of their house. But I do the dog, an A for the dog.
Yep.
Thanks.
Now, I just want to point out that you immediately jumped to the woman who grabbed a knife. Immediately, you said you might want to take some medication with you. Okay. Just going to leave that right there, Joe. Okay. And Josh, what did you successfully get?
Well, I too got a loved one. This wig, as well as the jewelry and earrings, because heaven forbid I look like trash. Then I also got some hand sanitizer and gum. You want good breath, and you don't want to catch the COVID in the fire. I also brought this sign, which is my honest prize possession. When I first moved to my Italian neighborhood, I found a chair that had this pizza box on it that says, "Take me home with you." I left the chair, but I took the sign because I very much see the old lady who wrote it in this scrawl, you know? And then, honestly, like Naomi, I got my checkbook. Well, me and Naomi are flush. Joe, if you need a loan, we got you.
Wow. I mean, I think just by sheer volume, that is a truly impressive haul
I was
right
going
there.
supermarket sweep rules, you know,
Absolutely.
out the clear aisles.
I mean, okay, Amy, give us a grade on this one here.
Yeah, I'd say A-. I think Naomi wins for this one. Just a little more practical, because you don't maybe want your wig and jewelry at the evacuation center.
Well, speak for
Well,
yourself.
if you want to turn
Say that
heads,
to my face, Amy. Say that to my face. But you don't want this at the evacuation. You do.
It does
Amy,
look good on you.
What would you say for people in the audience who don't maybe have already a tote bag ready with all of their emergency papers and they don't have their wigs in readily accessible locations? What would you recommend that people get ready to prepare for an evacuation if they ever have to?
Yeah, always good to have if you have a fire near you or there's a red flag warning in your state or something. Always good, like Naomi did, get together your most important possessions, your credit cards, birth certificates, other things, passports that are hard to replace, your car keys, your loved ones, including pets. That's very important to take because sometimes evacuations can be long, right? You might not only be out a few hours, you might be out for days. So yeah, I don't want to leave your critters at home.
Great. And, you know, I want to point out from someone in the audience saying, I'm more concerned that two of you have a checkbook these days, own a physical checkbook.
look, the internet may go down. We're talking a fire situation.
Thank
Okay?
you.
We got to go back to basics.
Yes.
You got to be ready. Okay? Stop living in
Although
2022. Okay?
I'm reasoning, neither of us brought a pen though, so we're gonna be out there like, you got a pen? Could I borrow a pen? Pay you for this?
Also, someone else in the audience asked this one. Someone said, laughter should never leave us. So how can we keep our spirit jovial when facing the challenges of forest fires? Amy, that's a good question for you and for our panel of comedians. What do you think when these are some dire things? Obviously, we're trying to make some jokes about it, but how do you stay light and optimistic when you're facing such a dire threat here?
Yeah, and really thinking about all the communities in California and other places that are going through this right at the moment, like it's definitely hard. I think for some of the communities that I work with, they try to treat it as is a vacation, as much as that doesn't sound fun, but especially if they have kids. Like lots of times the host communities you go to will organize different events, like take your kids to the zoos or other things. So although it's not equivalent to a vacation, you know, it's trying to make the best of a bad situation for sure.
Mm. And, you know, humans obviously have a very long relationship with fire, right? Far beyond recorded history, people have been using fire. And there are all sorts of spiritual practices and mythologies associated with fire. So we want to talk a little bit more about that in our next segment, Not Just Prometheus. So, Amy, you have studied all of the myths and some of the stories and the traditions that people have when it comes to fire. But also these days, one of the big things that people pass along, especially in the US and in parts of Canada, I assume as well, is there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to fire. There's the modern day myths are the inaccurate stories that we tell about fire. So panelists, in this game, we're going to ask you to tell us something that you think many people believe about fire, but which is actually incorrect. And then Amy will tell us whether you're right or wrong. So for example, Amy, what is one myth that a lot of people believe about fire that is not actually true?
That we can put out fire on the landscape. I think that's when we hear, you know, if we just throw planes or firefighters at it, we can put it out. But sometimes fires, when they're exhibiting a certain type of fire behavior, there's nothing that we can humanly do except for move out of the way and get people to safety.
And can we control where it goes next, or is that even outside of our control?
Depends on the fire and what's happening and the winds and everything. But yeah, sometimes the fire just does what it wants. For Indigenous people, we believe that fire has a spirit. Like for my nation, that fire has its own agency. And you hear from firefighters that fire, when they're on a fire, it sounds like a dragon or like a breathing being that's working on the landscape. So that's why we want the good fire instead, you know, a fire that's more controlled instead of these out of control fires that we don't know what they're going to do.
Well, panelists, I'm going to ask you now what something that you think a lot of people believe about fire, but that is not actually true is. And remember, the show is called Wrong Answers Only, so you do not have to be correct. It is totally fine if you're wrong. In fact, the show is called Wrong Answers Only. So, Naomi, let's get started with you. What is one myth that you think a lot of people believe about fire that's not actually true?
I think a lot of people think that fire can kill vampires, and I think that's not true, okay? I don't think fire is just going to turn a vampire to dust, okay? It can't happen. You got to stop. You got to stop just waving around your fire sticks thinking you're going to do something.
I 100% agree. Amy, what do you think? Would that count as a myth that people believe?
Yeah, I think this is outside of my expertise a little bit. From my reading as a child, I think, isn't it wooden stakes and garlic? I think it's much more
garlic,
effective.
Silver bullets, come on.
Yeah, much more effective than fire.
Okay, excellent work. Naomi, a great example of a myth that people believe about fire. Joe Firestone, what do you think? What's another myth that people believe about fire that's not actually true?
A lot of people believe that it's really cool when teens lick their fingers and put out a flame with their thumb and finger, and it's actually not cool. It's risky.
Amy, would you describe that? Is that risky?
I guess it depends how big the flame is and how wet your fingers are. So,
did you just say you don't know what my fingers are?
No,
how wet.
And this is a question Joe gets a lot, and I'm going to tell you she's got wet fingers.
Yes. Someone out there, I know, the audience for this show, I know you have the ability to make us a graph where one axis is how big the fire is and the other axis is how wet your fingers are. And we need to see that graph. We need it.
So, sorry, Amy, if I like really dipped my fingers deep in a cup of water, okay, and they come out soaking wet, and then I put it on top of a flame, you think that's safe?
I have to be careful here because no, fire is never safe. But I would say for like a birthday candle or something, could probably be done without, a hospital trip.
Okay.
Wow. Talking about hedging your bets, without a hospital trip is also a very high bar for safety. Yeah. There's a lot between hospital trip and safe for me personally. But I do love the idea, Joe, of you seeing a burning building, dipping your hands in a cup of water and running towards it. Okay, Josh, what's another myth that people believe about fire, but that is not actually true?
Sort of related, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions on the role of air. Because as a young scout, I was taught to blow on a fire to get it started, and yet also told on my birthday to blow on it to make it stop. So, which is it?
Yeah, good point. I mean, wind on an out of control wildfire, if you have a big wind event, it'll make it even more intense. So yeah, I think, you know what? Maybe there's physical science in the audience that know exactly about fire behavior and wind dynamics that could answer that for you.
No, Amy, we don't want to hear from them today. Okay? That's not what this is about today. This is about you, girl. It's your world, girl, and you bring it.
Yes. Amy, you are also an absolute master at politically dodging fire questions. I'm astonished. I'm
a federal bureaucrat by training, so
you have been trained well. One in the audience, we're getting some myths that people believe about fire. One person says, "Why is it that those darn smoke alarm batteries only start beeping in the middle of the night?" That is a myth that many people believe. That can't be true, or is that true, Amy? Do you find that that's true in your experience? Only in the middle of the night does the beeping start.
100% true.
Okay, that's not a myth. That's a fact.
All right.
Yeah.
What are the other myths that we missed? Do we miss any other big myths that people have about fire, Amy?
No, I think we were pretty good. I think the biggest one is just that fire suppression myth, like that if we just throw more airplanes on a fire, that we'll be able to get it out. I think at the moment, that's probably the biggest myth we're battling. But some of my colleagues actually just came out with a paper on wildfire misinformation and the toll it takes. So yeah, maybe we can add that to the follow-up email if people are interested.
Yeah, that would be great. Also, something you told me when we were talking before the show is that I think I had this idea too. This was a myth that I believed in, that fire damages the lands, that it's a bad thing, that we were helping nature by putting out fires. And you told me that that's actually not always the case.
Yeah, definitely a colonial myth that kind of came from European settlement of Canada and colonization of other areas. Yeah, God rest the Queen.
Oh, wow.
But
federal bureaucrat by training, but only for this country.
There you go.
He'll talk absolute shit about other countries.
So yeah, I think, so for me as an Indigenous person, like that caused a lot of harm, right? By bringing over that idea that fires were bad and basically taking for us what was an important cultural practice and making it seem like it wasn't good and that we were kind of stupid for thinking that it would be. And I think now, 100, 150 years later, we're really seeing the outcome of that, which is even more flammable for us.
And you told me that you even see this, and this has changed the way that I read the news about fire too, is you were telling me that you even see, like, in headlines say things like the wildfire ravaged over 200,000 acres. And that when you see that, you think that that's actually not an accurate way to report on fires.
Yeah, it really brings that fear of fire. I mean, there are times when fire is devastating and ravaging and hurts people. And it's, like I said before, wrong place, wrong time. But there are fires that are good, and that, it is an important thing for Indigenous people. We believe that fire has a place on the landscape, just like water or just like wind, like we were talking about before. And so we are stewards and supposed to be putting that activity on the land.
One question from the audience is, when you're setting a good fire, how do you reduce the risks to wildlife? What kind of considerations do you make for the animals, not just the people?
Yeah, so it really depends. So I should say too that good fire is on a different scale, right? So sometimes people will, when they're doing a cultural burn, it might just be burning a bush, like a berry bush outside their house, or like as big as a house, like a burn that size, or it could be, more hectares, but it's really in much more of a controlled way. And some communities have ceremonies before where they'll go through an area and drum and things to scare out the wildlife or other animals that might be present before they put the fire on the ground. But like technically, if we as a human can walk beside a good fire, then a deer or other animals could run and move out of the way, which isn't the case when there's a bad fire.
Well, as we're already talking about the good fire, bad fire, talking about your work, let's actually look at some of these photos of it. You sent us some incredible photos. So we're going to see what it actually looks like. This is a segment called Look Ma, I'm Controlled Burning. And so one of the things that I was most struck by in your work, Amy, is how often you work with communities and friends and quite often even your family. And I think of fire, again, I'm coming from this, you're opening my mind to the other way of looking at fire, but I have thought about it as something you would definitely want to keep your kids away from, but not you. In fact, let's look at this first photo that you shared with us. This is your daughter holding a gas can and fire starter right there, right? That is your daughter ready to start a fire. Josh, you were saying that kids say don't play with flames. There is her daughter starting a fire. And Amy, I imagine this is the kind of photo where your kid went to school and all the other kids were like, wow, Amy is such a cool mom. My mom won't even ever let me start a prescribed burn.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, yes. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, what were you going to say? I would love to hear it.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah. So I think it's important. Fire is dangerous, right? And there is a problem with kids starting fires, right? Like you always hear, because it's more of like a rebellious activity, right? Like, oh, we're going to go behind the school and start a fire or whatever. But in Indigenous communities, I think what we try to learn and teach from our elders is about the respect for fire. And so it's having kids around fire from a young age and learning that the only people that should be putting fire on the landscape are people that have the expertise and the decades of experience and the knowledge around fire. So for my daughter, she knows about fire. She knows that we have knowledge about fire and that we can do it, that she's not to do it, that it's dangerous. And so it's almost like, alcohol or sex. Like people think if you don't talk about it, the kids won't do it. But I mean, with fire, I found the more open you are with kids about how to that they shouldn't be using fire, and that, as they grow older, they'll learn good ways of fire. I just find that kids really love that type of learning of being on the land like that.
If you're gonna play with fire, I just would rather if you did it while I'm home and you did it in the basement.
Yes.
I'm a cool mom. You guys can like make some fires around the house, okay?
Yeah.
But only with me.
Yeah, you know what? I'll be honest. The fires that we do aren't like that exciting. Like they might look exciting but because they're so slow and so controlled that, like, honestly, my daughter will maybe help us light it, and then she usually just goes and sits in our side by side and watches YouTube on iPhone. So,
And it's like YouTubing, like raging fire, not raging on fire.
yeah, exactly.
Wait, Amy, I have a question, and I hope this doesn't step on a question you're going to ask, Chris.
No,
But
please.
when we talk about, the control of it, and for instance, in that very first picture where the flames are kind of low, what determines the height of flames? Is it just the amount of air that gets in there?
Yeah, and how much dead fuel is there for the fire to burn, right? And how dry that fuel is. So for me, like when we're burning, we try to burn in the early spring or late fall. And in Canada, that's when there's still snow on the ground. So the vegetation, or at least like the ground, might even still be frozen or wet. So you don't really get those huge like wall of flames that you see on the news with these out of control fires. Because those are happening with, like, they're burning a lot of vegetation that's really dry when it's like, 120 degrees Fahrenheit out. And so it's just a totally different type of burning.
Okay.
Well, we have another photo of your daughter out there with you. So let's look at this next photo of her. I love this photo too, because it's like, if that fire alone wasn't enough, in this photo, I'm also exposing my daughter to a wolf.
Yeah, that's our good old husky Sitka.
Uh-huh.
and yeah, even our dogs aren't afraid of fire because they're so used to having it around, which is kind of funny.
Well,
And when you come out, you set it with, someone is asking, like, when you're actually setting it, what are the procedures? What kind of experimental procedures are you using to achieve a desired burn? It seems a little bit to me like it's less of more like a scientific experiment and more like you're being in touch with the land and seeing what is there and kind of going along with that. Or how much of it is like planned out in advance in a very like grid system, and how much is just going with what is naturally showing in the land, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so to me, Indigenous fire is Indigenous knowledge is the oldest type of science that's out there, and it's basically based from long-term observation of the land. So when we go out and burn, like some elders told me that you look for cues on the landscape. So for example, like when a particular berry comes out or when a certain fish is spawning, and that's when you know that it's the appropriate time to put fire on the landscape to achieve like a certain outcome that you might want. So yeah, I think that's, for me, like we know when to burn when all those things line up. So although we might not be looking at like, the different scientific measures, so like relative humidity and all that, like for Indigenous people that are really familiar with their territory, they know when things are dry or when things are wet, because they know that landscape.
Someone is also asking, which is related to knowing the landscape and the plants, what are the best plants to forage in a recently burned area?
Yeah, 100% berries. So lots of times berries, like the bushes like get overgrown and there's just tiny little berries, but after you burn, you can get some beautiful berry bushes growing back. And one thing that the berries do is draw bears to the area too. So for people that do bear hunting or harvesting, it's an easy way to harvest bears, because you basically just burn, make some beautiful berries, and wait for the bears to come.
That
Well-
sounds scary. We wait for the bears to come. I'm like, oh God. But also, I grew up in Harlem, so I don't know anything about no berries. I don't know nothing about no nature girl, so I trust you.
Yeah, I mean, it's better for the bear to come to you, right? Than yeah,
Is
than
it?
the opposite. When
I don't know. I would prefer
Yeah.
the bears just not near me at all. They come
Yeah.
to me.
well, it's less work. You don't have to track them, find them. Yeah, you can just kind of wait for them to come. And so as an Indigenous person, right, if you're living a subsistence lifestyle, you're trying to conserve energy and other things, right? You don't want to be going on a 100-kilometer or 100-mile expedition to try
There's
and
a
find a
much
bear.
easier version of you going to the bear, and it is a zoo. Just so you know. If you you ever do want to see a bear, no tracking required.
And just unlock the fence, or like unlock the gate, Josh, is what you're saying? Just go to a zoo after hours, okay? You will have to break in. And then once you have broken into said zoo, you just open up whatever you want to open up. Grab what you need, and then you just dip.
Bring your checkbook. You're
I was
ready to
gonna
go.
say, the right check will open a lot of doors.
And don't forget this tool.
Yep, there you go. Small butter knife as well will help. You know, Amy, it's one thing that I'm really learning here, and you're changing my mind on, is a lot of the things that I would consider to be my biggest fears in the wild are things that you consider to be good things, where you're like, and the great news is after you're not scared of fire anymore and the fire's done, the bears will arrive. And they're also good news. And that's great. I love that. It's changing the way that I think about the forest. Well, let's see another photo here. This is one of those good fires that you were talking about. That's how small a good fire is, right? Like you're literally just walking alongside of it. It really does not look big and intimidating in that. That's a good fire right there, right?
Yep. Yeah. So clean up all that dry, dead grass that's there, because that's a real hazard. You know, if it was to ignite somehow, you can get really flashy grass fires that are very dangerous. So yeah, just burn that in a nice, slow, controlled burn, and you get the most beautiful grass growing back after. And so another thing in Canada is, because we deal with like frozen ground a lot, after you burn, it turns the ground black. So then the sun heats the ground, which unfreezes the ground quicker, so you get earlier green growth coming up.
Oh.
Wait,
So yeah,
Amy,
it extends the growing season too.
Amy, what's the best smelling thing and what's the worst smelling thing to burn?
Great question.
So sage, I think, is the best smelling thing. I was just part of some burning in the BC interior with some fire keepers where they were burning sage. And that was, it was like a ceremony in itself. And I have heard, and then I think the worst thing, I mean, tires are garbage probably, but I mean, we try not to burn those.
Sure.
Let's get some questions from the audience too. So someone is asking, what's the strategy that you use to keep smoke out of your eyes?
Yeah. Well, on the fires that we have, because they're so small, like you stand downwind basically of where the smoke's blowing, and and so that they're not very big, it's very controlled, you know where the smoke column is, and it's only a few hours of exposure. So that's the one nice thing. Lots of prescribed burners that I know, they always say the reason why they want to put prescribed fire on the ground is because there's no smoke option. Like the forest will burn, it's whether it burns out of control or burns in a controlled way by us. And at least if we're controlling it, we kind of have more control over the smoke too.
Someone else is asking, regarding stop, drop, and roll, if you're wearing nice clothes, can you just stop and drop if you don't want to get dirty?
I think that is a question for Josh.
Wow.
Thank you, Amy. The
Perfect.
charred look is actually very in right now. So
Yeah. I do love that this person seems to believe that there's a scenario where their clothes are actively on fire and yet they can
you're
still
still
say
like,
they're
I
not
can
looking
salvage this. Yeah.
dirty. Yes. If I don't roll on the ground, no one will know. Is stop, drop, and roll? Now, I know a lot of things that I learned in school have now been upgraded, and like I'm far behind the times. Is stop, drop, and roll still best
If
practice?
I find out stop, drop, and roll is colonialist right now, I'm really gonna have my mind blown.
Yeah, no, stop, drop, and roll, a very good practice. I know a few people actually who've been on out of control fires who've had to use that technique, and it's definitely saved them. So 100%. My daughter actually just learned that in grade 1 last year, so they're still teaching it to kids.
Great. Now, I have a question for you based on a real experience I had, which is I was at a conference, kind of a fancy conference, and it was like
Congrats
the first
again,
night.
Chris.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I just wanted, actually, that was the whole question. It was the first night. People were kind of still getting to know each other. There was the little like first day awkwardness. And one woman had a very thin scarf and it accidentally got draped into a candle and it ignited. So she had to drop the scarf on the ground and stamp it out. She was unharmed, but everyone in the room obviously looked because she had lit on fire.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
stop, drop, and roll will put out the flame, but what do you do for the social awkwardness after when everyone is looking at you and you have been on fire?
I don't know. Blame someone else.
Oh, wow. Just fully deny reality. Like, I wasn't on fire. You were on fire.
Why did you do this to me? That's what you say to everyone who's looking at you. Why did you do this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
These are
blame
great
the
options.
conference. Yeah, blame the conference organizers for having open flame.
Yeah. Maybe say, I thought this was a fancy conference.
I thought this was fancy, and you let this happen? Okay, one last question here, and then we're gonna get to
Hey,
more
Chris,
of the audience questions.
What did you
Yes.
do? Did you say anything to the woman?
I said, wait, now it's important that you know the timing on this. She had fully put out the thing. It was probably full 30 seconds after everything was done. And then I said, are you okay? Can I help? No. So much too late to do anything. I offered useless help. Okay, question for you. Have we learned anything about fires on Earth by studying fires on other planets?
Oh, great question. My friends at NASA would know, but I really don't know. I mean, probably looking at fire behavior and dynamics from how oxygen and other gases interact on different planets. But yep, outside of my field, unfortunately. Not
Okay,
too many
Chris.
Indigenous. Oh, yeah.
Amy is a fire expert on Earth, okay?
Yeah.
You can't be bringing her up here asking her what's happening on other planets, okay?
Yeah.
I'm so
Thank
sorry.
you,
Lucky
Naomi.
she'd talk
Thank
trash
you.
about UK. She's not going to talk trash about other galaxies.
Thank you.
Well, please, audience, keep asking questions. I know I haven't gotten to all of them, but we will try to get to more later on in the show. For now, we have already learned a lot about fire and fire management over the course of the show. But before tonight even began, when you were just completely fresh, knew nothing of Amy's research, we asked each of you to draw a technique or a strategy that you thought would help manage wildfires. And we would love to see those right now. This is Innovations in Fire Management. So Amy, we're going to see what these lovely folks had drawn as they thought a potential innovation in fire management before they'd ever spoken to you. Josh, let's start with you. Josh, will you show us your innovation in fire management?
Of course, Chris. There's a lot of talk of bringing water to fire, but I thought, why not bring fire to water to put it out? So as you'll see, this is a forest and here is fire. And out in the ocean, I've put Beyonce on a barge. She's doing a live performance of Renaissance for the first time. And you know anybody's going to be like, well, we got to get to that. And little do they know they've walked right into the ocean, fire extinguished.
Amy, I'd love for you to your just initial take on that as a pitch for fire management.
Yeah, I mean, technically, the physics science is right. Like that.
Okay.
Well,
fire
as long
went-
as the
if-
science
yeah.
checks out, that's
If
what I'm
fire-
here for.
If fire went into water, it would go out. Yeah, I do love Beyonce, but don't know if that's big enough draw.
Well, let's talk to your
Like-
friends at NASA, on that one too. I don't know that any of us can really speak to this otherworldly talent.
Yes, I absolutely, first of all, Josh, it was beautiful drawing. I loved it. I thought the explanation was almost not even necessary since the drawing was so accurate and
That
almost
is
like
really true.
photorealistic. But I also love, Amy, that you were able to make it correct by zooming so far out that what you said was correct that's correct. Water puts out fire. So thank you for that.
Trying to be supportive here.
And you were so supportive.
Yeah.
Joe Firestone, what did you come up with? What was your innovation in fire management?
Well, I guess I'm not much of a drawer. So this is what I drew.
Okay.
Okay, so do you see? It's kind of like basically what it looks like here is I tried to, do you know when you can like draw like motion?
Uh-huh.
So basically this is a joint and it can swing around, you know what I mean? Does that make it clear? Is that clear?
No.
It's not
Like,
clear to me. Amy, you're the expert. Is that clearer to you? Because to me, I still am absolutely clueless about what Joe has drawn.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry.
And you haven't really described what you've drawn, but sort of what you wished you'd drawn. You're like, when you could draw in motion, not what you've
Okay.
done here.
So I'll do an example with my arm. Okay, so this is basically okay, so this is like my arm, and then this part of my arm. Okay, so like
Yeah, so
Okay,
I
and it
just want to
spins
point out,
around.
Joe, a fundamental problem here is that it's not us understanding the motion. We don't know what the thing that's swinging
Yeah, is
around
it a pipe? Is it a
You've got
cucumber?
no explanation.
Is it a hose? What is
What-
this, Joe?
what's swinging?
Is it just your arm?
Is it your arm swinging?
it's a mud splasher. So
A
basically,
mud splash.
it's not water because I don't think water's enough. So basically, this is a tube filled with liquid mud. Okay, and then the mud will be splattered out kind of in all directions.
Okay, so Amy, how far out are you going to zoom to make this one correct?
Yeah, so sprinklers are an important part of fire suppression activities. So I don't know about mud. It might clog the sprinkler, but
Well, that's why it's
Could work.
spinning like this.
Well, luckily, this is more of a slinger than a sprinkler. I agree. A sprinkler would for sure be clogged, but this is sort of.
It's liquid mud.
It's liquid mud.
Mud is liquid. Liquid mud. You mean mud? Mud.
Yeah, mud is between a liquid and a solid. That's the whole point. It's water and dirt, Joe.
Yeah,
You
I
mean
think-
dirty water?
Amy, do you think it would have been better to put sand in there?
no. So
Yes, okay, there we go. Confidently a no. Well, I came all the way around. I think it's great. Someone in the chat, Joe, is saying that you may have just drawn a boomerang, which a mud-filled boomerang, and someone else, you really prompted them to have a deep personal memory that one time they were trying to light a joint and they lit their bangs on fire. So I do think that a joint filled with liquid mud could have helped them. that could have helped. Okay, Naomi, what did you draw?
Okay,
your
look,
technique?
I'm no artist either, okay? And there's also text here. So what we're doing is, okay, so in the middle, imagine this is a forest, okay? General forestry, okay? And then what we've got on either side, also on the sides, I just couldn't keep drawing, too tiring. These are bricks, just a low ring of bricks. Flame retardant spray, applied thrice weekly, okay? So whoever's in charge of this park, they're going out thrice weekly, just giving it a little spray. Give it a little spray, so that way, should this all go ablaze, it's gonna stop at the bricks. It's gonna stop at the flame retardant bricks. Look, I don't know if you need to put the flame retardant spray on every day. Maybe it's a monthly situation. I assume a minimum of thrice weekly, just to make sure you're coated and it's working. What do you think? What do you think, Doctor?
yeah, so I think the like flame retardant or fire retardant, great idea.
Thank
My
you.
only concern for that model would be like if the fire started in the forest, because I wasn't sure like the scale of how big your forest was, or
Well,
how many walls
Or is
of
this a
bricks you would
forest
need.
inside of a house?
No,
So
no.
you're
This is
saying
a
in-
giant forest. This is a giant forest. Like
But
you
there's
are
like
putting.
a-
This could be a mile of bricks. This
There's
could be
like a
12
brick
miles of
fence
bricks.
around it.
So
Yes.
Naomi, I do want to point out, I think Amy has identified a really important question for you, which is you have assumed that it's protecting people from the fire going from outside in, but what if they're instead trapped inside with the fire? Which is-
Well, then they should not be living inside the bricks. Okay, the
That's on
basis
them.
of my flame retardant brick structure
Well,
is that
what if-
people are not
What if you're
inside.
a simple worker there for your thrice weekly shift and a fire starts while you're at work?
Well, then you better have sprayed down them bricks. They need to be sprayed down.
Maybe you just got there, gonna have a bagel before you get started and a fire starts.
You should use the mud slinger, but have it be filled with flame retardant.
Also,
Yes.
you know, thrice weekly, you're really increasing the odds that you're there in a fire. Thrice weekly is quite frequent.
This is meant to be preparatory. Amy's already told us you want to come in doing this when it's a little damp. Okay, you want to do this before the fire pops off, Christopher.
Okay, I'm convinced.
You want to talk damp? Beyonce on that barge in the open ocean. Mama's getting splashed.
Okay, so Amy, I think that we've given you some pretty solid fire management ideas for techniques.
Incredibly solid.
Yeah.
What would you say overall? You're using them, you're not using them, you're going to use them as inspiration, you're going to use them literally exactly as designed. Where would you be on that?
Yeah, good ideas. I would say. I think the one issue is maybe that we haven't talked about is that lots of fires actually start by embers. So like, you know, so out of the smoke, basically it can rain down ash and embers, and that will put a fire ahead. So that's my one concern, Naomi, with yours, is if, you know, it's started by an ember shower or something, it might just jump right over your bricks.
Okay, so I need to account for gender reveal parties. Okay, you're right. I have got to make some adjustments to this plan.
And so, Amy, you didn't have any criticisms for this? This is perfect?
Yes, good sprinkler design. Yes.
Great. Well, we're about to wrap up. We're almost out of time. So, Amy, before we end this segment, I do want to know, are there innovations in fire management or new technologies or something like that that you're really excited about that you think might change things down the road? Or is it instead that we're going to go back to a more traditional, useful, more grounded in nature, indigenous knowledge version of fire? Or is it a combination of the two?
Yeah, I hope for a combination of the two. So we have Indigenous people that are doing Indigenous-led fire management on the ground, so bringing it back to kind of those more holistic practices. But then we also use, you know, satellite detection, modeling, and other things, so we can basically, you know, see where a fire is going to happen, have better suppression techniques to put it out. So I'm kind of hopeful for, like, I think both.
Great. Well, thank you, Amy, so much for being here. We're coming to the end of the show, so I'm going to check in on our score. And by far, the person with the most points was Naomi Ekperigan. Naomi, by having the most points.
Yes.
And Joe Firestone, you had the least. So the show is called Wrong Answers Only. Joe Firestone, you have won. Naomi, you have lost. And the only person who did not really win either way was Josh Sharp. Next time, do better or worse. Josh, that's on you. Do better or worse. Join Beyonce on that barge and live your best life.
I'd love to.
Amy, before we wrap up, what do you hope that people take away? Why should people care about your research, and what do you hope that they take away about fire after tonight's show?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is support local initiatives, right, about fire. So Prescribed Fire Association, Indigenous-led or Indigenous nations that want to put Indigenous fire back on the ground. So I think that those are the big things, is really, let's look at fire in a different way, because what we're currently doing isn't working.
And panelists, that is what Amy hopes that you will take away from tonight's show. What will you actually be taking away? So Naomi, let's start with you. What will you be taking away from tonight's show?
Well, I'm just hoping, you know, like the last time I was here with the man who made exoskeletons, Amy, I'm just like hoping, like, hey, can I come live with you in the apocalypse? Can I move up there with my dog and my little folder? And can I just come be where you are? Because obviously you have survival skills and I don't. And I would just like to know if we could just lock that down now on recorded media.
Yes, sure. If you can get up here after to rock you, to where I am, you're more than welcome.
Wow, that's legally binding. Anytime you say something on a National Academy of Sciences broadcast, it is legally binding. So lock that in. Joe Firestone, what are you going to take away from tonight's show?
Well, I learned a lot. But the one thing that I keep thinking about is, what does the phrase downwind mean?
Yep, so I guess if you're where the wind is blowing.
You learned you wanted to ask a question.
I love that you're like, I learned so much that I want to learn one last bonus thing before I leave.
I'm greedy for knowledge.
Greedy for knowledge. That's what they say about Joe Firestone right there. Okay. And Josh Sharp, last but certainly not least, what did you learn? What are you going to take away from tonight's show?
Well, I think there's two things that frankly we'll all take away. And one is that maybe we don't have to be quite as afraid of fire as we thought we were supposed to be. But I think also you should be afraid of a woman told her wig was an A-. Because I'm going to have y'all stop, dropping, and rolling tonight. Okay.
Oh, well, I can't imagine a better way to end the show than that. If you are in the audience, you're going to get an email after the show with bonus information from our expert. You're going to get links to get deeper into Amy's work and her research. We'll put in a link to her book, as well as some great jokes and comedy from all of our hilarious panelists. And so you can find out more about them and follow them and watch all of their shows and all the things they're involved with. We would also love to get feedback from you about the show. We're always trying to improve. So tell us what you liked. What can we do better? And that is it for tonight. But we are going to be back next month with a show all about glowing fish, all about soft robots in the ocean and shark eye cameras and all sorts of amazing stuff. You don't want to miss that. You can register for that right now at labx.org/WAO. In the meantime, though, thank you so much to tonight's expert, Amy Cardinal Christianson. Thank you to our panelists, Naomi Ekperigan, Joe Firestone, and Josh Sharp. And thank you so much to everyone at the National Academy of Sciences and LabX and our back-end folks who made this show happen. Thank you to Amechi, Dempsey, Jesse, Amir, Mario, and everyone on the tech team. I am your host, Chris Duffy, and this has been Wrong Answers Only. Find out more about this show and future episodes online at labx.org/WAO. Thank you so much. Have a great night and enjoy your delicious bears.